All right, guys, so welcome back. So this is our second video in this week's series. As you can see, I still have the illustration that my son did on here. And if you haven't watched the other video and you're wondering, what this is about, go look at the other video. I do these videos in order so that you guys will have something to follow in kind of a sequence fashion. So, all right. So let's get started. So in this video, what we're gonna do is go ahead and get started in Illustrator. So what I have done, I'm gonna go ahead and I'll keep this open just in case I want to use it. But I'm gonna start a new file. So file new, of course. And just like you do in Photoshop, the screen should look very familiar to you. You can choose common, but you also have your intents up here. And this is where Illustrator is just saying, hey, what do you intend to do? Do you intend to look at a saved file, a mobile? Yours might look a little different than mine because you guys might not have opened this program before or have any other projects that you created. But as a matter of fact, let me go ahead and close this because I just thought about the fact that your screen might look a little different. All right. So when you go into Illustrator, when you open it up for the first time, your screen might be a little different because you might have the welcome screen. If you have that welcome screen, you can pretty much click out of it to get here. So in fact, I think I can get to... there is a way to get to the welcome screen, and it's through one of these menu panels, but I'm just going to say just click out of it. All right, so while you're here, you will see that mine has other projects in here because other projects, because I work in Illustrator a lot, so I have a lot of programs that are already in here. I work in Illustrator, my kids work in Illustrator, and stuff like that. So but if you don't see your recent, that's because you don't have any recent documents that you work on. So no big deal. Just let you know that's why. All right. So when you first go in, if you're in the welcome screen, you can just hit create new. And of course, open means that you're opening a file that already exists. So I'm just going to hit create new. And then again, so now I'm back to the screen that I was in when I had the other project open. So what I want to do in here is tell Illustrator what my intent is. And as I was showing you, we got mobile, web, print, film, audio, art, and illustration. And all these means is that they're kind of templated, set up for you depending on what you want to do. For instance, if we choose mobile, well, then we have templates that relate to mobile. We have templates down here, to help you guys start off. And then we have our presets, and our information. And if you look at the presets, it's pretty much based off of mobile. The screen resolution is 72, the color mode is RGB, and the sizing as well. So if we choose print, then you'll notice that the color mode changed from RGB to CMYK because CMYK is what you would use for print. If that's confusing to you, make sure you go and check out those other videos, the design videos, because there where this is clarified, the difference between RGB and CMYK. You'll also see that the resolution is higher. It's at 300 ppi because its intent is to print and you need a higher resolution to print. If we go back to mobile or web, you're going to see that it's at a screen resolution of 72 ppi because you need a lower resolution to display it crisp on the screen. All right, so our intent for our demo, we're going to go with, since we're creating a character, if a character, we'll go for print. But make sure you're reading what your intent is and color modes and stuff like that, because you don't even have to choose any of these. You can set up your settings over here. So if I say, oh, this needs to be 4x4 inches, and then the orientation won't matter because it's a square. So no matter which orientation you pick, it's going to be square. And then you would have to change that to inches based off of what I say, or whatever inches of pixels, or whatever the assignment is asking you to do, or client. And then if we talk about a bleed and stuff like that, then you would have to set all that up yourself. But in this case, we're going to go with print, and we'll say we want it to be square. So maybe I'm going to switch this to inches, and maybe I want this whole thing to be 8 by 8 inches, and then maybe I want a bleed on the top. And so so what bleed is, it's the areas that go beyond your printed area. So if you look at some of these examples right here, um, so it's going to go beyond that paper. So it's kind of how you don't have the white background in the paper. So if you look at these templates that are down here, right here where it says template, you'll see that this has a bleed, and that the bleed on this one is that colored reddish, background right there. So that would have a bleed. That's because you're not seeing white on the edges. You're actually seeing that color. So a bleed, and the same with this one, yellow would be a bleed because you're not seeing the white paper. You're seeing that color bleed off the edge of the paper. Here, the bleed is different because the bleed actually is going to be this text, because the text is bleeding off the paper. Although on this side it would be this color, which is a different color than the white paper, but on these sides it would be the actual image is bleeding off. That means this image right here, the full circle extends beyond the edges of the paper, but it's a bleed to give a nice look and to enhance the design of this one. So that area, that would be your bleed. Other photos down here, the bleed would be the color, and it would be the pink-ish design that's bleeding off. Up here in this one, you see this green grass. The bleed is that image that's bleeding off the page because it goes beyond. See, the white paper isn't showing because there's a bleed going beyond the borders of the page. Down here, going further down, these brochures, the bleed is color, but the color here is blue. The color here is going to be the image and this black color, and here is going to be the image. And all down here at the bottom, where it's bleeding black, it's bleeding, the image. And this bottom part doesn't have a bleed because it's just all white paper, right? In this one, the bleed would be, the edges of this blue that are bleeding off of the paper. This one won't need a bleed because it's all white. You see that? Oh, but actually, nope, the right side, it'll need a bleed. So the bleed on this one will run on the top, the right side, and the bottom, because that gray is bleeding off of the paper so that it's no longer white, it's gray. Okay? Hopefully you guys are getting it, understanding it. If not, I can put some bleed examples or some more bleed examples in the chat. I just wrote a note to myself as well. Okay, and then over here where we have this Halloween, the bleed is color. It's bleeding off the edges of the page. And over here where we have this Astro Funk, you'll see like the bleed is that gradient bleeding off, but also so it's bleeding off at the top, and it's bleeding off on the right side, and you can't see the bottom, which is bleeding as well. But what's bleeding on the right side is this image and the gradient. So the bleed area is that area that's set out so that the printer knows, oh, this area is going to bleed beyond the page, and this is where the cut is going to be. So what you want to make sure that you do is that you pretty much talk to your printer beforehand. There are some defaults like 1/8 inch and 1/4 inch bleeds and stuff like that, but you'll want to talk to your printer to see if what their specific bleed line is, and they'll tell you that and more information than to make sure that your project is successful. All right, so for now though, we'll just go with print 8x8. Orientation in this case doesn't matter because it's a square. Now if I had wanted it portrait, which means that the sides are shorter, the top, the vertical sides are longer than the width, then that would be portrait. If it's landscape, which means the horizontal sides are longer than the height, then it would be landscape. So, and then here where we talk about artboards, you can have multiple artboards. This will make sense later, more so right now. I'm just getting you through this dialog box, but artboards, if you plan on making like 8 projects, like especially when you get to your stationery project or things like that, where you're gonna have multiple projects that you're creating, then you would create more artboards. But really all an artboard is the sheet of paper So the one sheet of paper is going to be one artboard. Another sheet of paper would be another artboard, and so forth and so on. So if this design right here with the yellow and the bold, this is one artboard, and all of these are different artboards because they're different parts of the project. Okay, so if it's your stationery project, your logo will be on its own artboard. Your letterhead would be on its own artboard. Your business card front will be on one artboard. Business card back will be on one artboard, so forth and so on. All right. So that being said, let me go ahead and so bleed. I might give it. Let me see, a 0.25 inch bleed. That's a pretty big bleed. That's okay. I just want to show you what it's going to look like. CMYK color, since it's print, I want it to be that. The raster effects, I want it to be 300 ppi, just to show you, you have your other raster effects as well. You might call the printer, talk to the printer, and he might tell you, oh, for this particular project, you only need 150 ppi. And you just do what he tells you. So that's what that's for. Preview mode, don't worry about it. It's going to stay at the default, but if you want to do pixel and overprint previews, you can set those up, and I'll show you guys how to do all that later. If you want to do more settings, like if you need more options, more things you want to do with the artboards and stuff like that, you have these options in here. For instance, if I had 3 artboards, I can then notice I get more options where I can set up how the artboards show. By default, it shows grid by row, but there's also grid by column, arranged by row. None of this makes any sense to you right now. It will later, and I do want you to know that those options are there. So that's the only reason I'm introducing them. Oh, also, you can play with the spacing and the columns of the artboards. But I'm going to go down to 1. Notice when you're just doing 1, you don't have those options because it doesn't really apply to anything. So we go down here, we play with the different sizes. The size, do I want it to be letter size, which is typically the default is letter size, but you have other options too, tabloid and preset in there for you. We're going with a custom preset. That's why it says custom, because we're setting up and changing it to fit our needs for this project. So 8x8 for me, inches, orientation. Remember your size of the project, you're going to follow the information in Blackboard of the size of the project. If you're wanting to follow the syllabus, make sure it's the updated syllabus, and I'll put in there. It's on, it should be in there by the time you view this video. All right. With the height, 8 inches, orientation, bleed, that's set for us. Advanced would be if we needed to change the color mode or the raster effects and all that fun stuff, but we are good to go with it right now. So I'm going to choose create. And then what you're going to see is, so our document is set up, right? So this is the document set up, but you'll see this red line, right? And this red line, let me zoom in. There we go. So you should see this red line, and that red line is your bleed line. So that's where you're telling the printer, oh, I want this part of the project to bleed beyond. So this is your cut line, right? Because this is the edge of your paper. So this bleed is where you're bleeding stuff out. So if I were to create a box, let's say remember how you saw like those gray boxes that was bled on one side versus the other. So if I knew that, let me get rid of that stroke real quick. So if I knew that I was going to bleed out, so in my design, what was going to bleed out was just this box area. And that might be because I have specific information that I want to be in here, right? So now the printer, when the printer sees it, he sees, oh, this is her document and where her cut line is, but she also has this area that's bleeding out, and the printer would know, okay, let me make sure I'm going to cut it here, but it's going to be black, right? So this part is going to bleed out. That means there's going to be no white showing from this part to this part. It's going to bleed out with color. So it's pretty much just to set up your bleed so that you don't have those white edges, and it enhances your design. It makes it more aesthetically pleasing. So, and serves multiple purposes as well. So That right there is your document setup. Remember, make sure you're following whatever guidelines when you do your project that you're given. But this is the video for document setup, how you set up your Illustrator file. We'll be back with another video for in a few. All right, so I'll see you guys in a moment.